rolling around with a big ass ice cream Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard the Gateway Clipper Fleet's Three Rivers Queen for a 1-hour sightseeing cruise. Just departed from our Station Square dock. Before we get underway, just a few safety and service announcements we'd like to go over. In the unlikely event of an emergency, I will announce instructions and procedures from the pilot house. The exits aboard this vessel can be found at the bow and stern of all three decks. It's the front and back of the boat. All exits leading in and out of the vessel do have raised seals, so ask that you watch your step as you travel through the doors. Please take your time on the stairs and use the handrails. Life jacket lockers aboard this vessel can be found at the bow or front of the first deck, stern of the second deck, and on the third deck behind the pilot house. All life jacket lockers are clearly marked. Donning instructions are located inside. Due to Pennsylvania state law, smoking is prohibited on the interior of the vessel. And we do ask that you utilize trash receptacles located throughout the boat for any and all garbage you may have. Remember, absolutely nothing goes overboard at any time. Restrooms aboard the Queen can be found at the bow of both the first and second decks. And for your convenience, we do have a full-service cocktail bar and concession stand on the second deck, and a full-service cocktail bar on the first deck as well. This is a happy hour cruise. Our happy hour pricing will be in effect for the duration of the cruise. Make sure you stop on down, talk to our bartenders, ask them about the drink specials they have going on today. Now, this is also a narrated cruise, and up here on the top deck, to tell you all about the city of Pittsburgh, a little history, a little lore, and to point out some cool sights, is your narrator and tour guide, Joyce. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to her. Take it away, Joyce.
Thank you very much, Captain Aaron, and welcome aboard, everyone, to the Gateway Clipper Three Rivers Queen for your sightseeing cruise. How is everyone doing this beautiful evening? That sounded a little unsure, but you know what? I'll work on that. This is a happy hour cruise. I want you to be happy during this entire hour. My name is Joyce. Over the next hour, we're going to sail all three rivers. We're going to go underneath a bunch of bridges, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the ones we go under. And we're going to see a lot of historic landmarks and some interesting buildings. And by the end, maybe you will have retained a couple of those things. But there's a lot to go over. So we're going to dive right in because we're about to go underneath the first of many bridges. And it's appropriate that this is the first bridge of our tour because it's the oldest one in the city. This is the Smithfield Street Bridge that we're coming up on now. This bridge opened in 1883. It is what's called a lenticular truss bridge, and it was designed by one Gustav Lindenthal. However, this is the third bridge to have stood on this very spot. Way back in 1818, there was a wooden covered bridge that was built here, and it was called the Monongahela Bridge, as we are on the Monongahela River. And it stood at this point until April 10th of 1845. That morning on April 10th, an unsupervised fire that was going to be used for laundry turned into an inferno. An inferno that burned for 7 hours. And by the end of the day, a third of the city of Pittsburgh was burned to the ground, including that wooden bridge. So, amongst all the other rebuilding that the city had to do, they hired John Roebling, the same guy who designed the Brooklyn Bridge, to replace it. And he designed a wire rope suspension bridge that stood here for a few more decades until an increase in traffic required it to be redesigned yet a third time. And then from there, we have what is now known as the Smithfield Street Bridge that opened in 1883. And that's a lot of history for a single bridge, which is why in 1994 it was made a National Historic Landmark. That means it will maintain its antiquated looking stylings, particularly on the yellow arches. It also means that the city is not allowed to paint the whole thing yellow, even if it might want to complete its set. That's okay. We're going to see plenty of yellow bridges on our tour. As you can see, we are making our turn on the Monongahela River, and we're going to start sailing down towards the point. But before that, I want to bring your attention to what is now on the left side of the vessel on Mount Washington. If you can't see it, if you're in the bow, you'll be able to see it soon. A set of steep railroad tracks going up to the top of the mountain. This is known as a funicular incline and is one of Pittsburgh's 2 remaining passenger inclines. This one in particular is the Monongahela Incline, and when it opened in 1870, it is now known as the nation's oldest and steepest continually operating funicular incline. We only have 2 so far today, but at one time Mount Washington had as many as 17. That's because Mount Washington used to be an active coal mine. It was called Coal Hill, and all this lush greenery you see here today was completely stripped bare while it was an active mine. And those 17 inclines would haul coal and materials and workers up and down all day on the mountain. But as eventually that mine closed down and the trees grew back, and we just have our 2 remaining inclines that are great for tourists and commuters every day. Now I want to bring your attention to the right, to the city. And we just passed a building that is called the Grant Building. It's a brown one with the Huntington logo on it, if you can still see it. But what's really interesting about the building is not how it looks, it's that it has a beacon on its roof. That beacon is a certified lighthouse. It's Pittsburgh's only certified lighthouse. And at nighttime, it spells out the word Pittsburgh in Morse code. It did break though. One time there was a malfunction in the relay switch, and it just blinked out a lot of nonsense, until someone realized something was wrong, and in 2009 they were able to fix it. Now that we're clear of the bridge, look a little deeper in the city, you'll see a tall, dark building with an angled roof. That is the tower at PNC Place. I'm sorry, the tower at PNC Plaza. This building is the newest skyscraper to the city skyline. It opened in 2015, and it is one of the greenest buildings in the world. As you can probably imagine, that angled roof, it's covered in solar panels. It has a Platinum LEED certification. Now, LEED is an acronym. It stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. But I want to bring your attention now to the river's edge, again on the right-hand side. I'll be directing your attention a lot to the right. So if you're seated on the left, you'll definitely be able to see everything, but maybe turn your chair a little bit so you're not constantly straining your neck. But yes, down here on the river's edge, this is just a humble parking structure that's known as the Mon Wharf. Now these days it's known as a cheap place to get some parking, but you've got to check the weather first, because it is also the first place in the city to flood when we get too much rain. Those steel posts there are not to keep debris from washing in, it's to keep the Monongahela from drinking your car. Because 40 to 50 cars have suffered that fate over the years, and some of them are still in the river to this day. But way back when, the Monongahela Wharf was like any other wharf, and they built steamboats. And it was also where the Gateway River got its start. But now, I'm going to bring your attention back up to the city skyline and see the sunset is reflecting off of the glimmering PPG Plaza, the spiky building, the most iconic building to the city's silhouette. PPG Place has 6 buildings and just the 1 tower, but all 6 have those spires on the top. The architects were influenced by neo-Gothic architecture while they were designing it. And the whole plaza consists of over 19,000 panes of that beautiful black glass. Now coming up here, again, I'm going to bring your attention back down to the river's edge. And this time you can look to either the left or the right, because you probably saw these as you were boarding today. These stone structures are bridge piers. This is all that remains of the Wabash Railroad Bridge. The Wabash Railroad Bridge opened up in 1908. It was kind of known as a hard luck bridge because of a series of calamities that happened while it was being constructed, and some things that happened after it was already open. While it was being constructed, it even once collapsed in the middle. But in 1946, unfortunately, the terminal that it served, where the Key Bank building is today, well, it kind of burned to the ground. And 2 years later, the bridge itself was demolished as it was no longer of any use. But the piers stuck around. The city always thought they were going to build a new vehicular bridge in its place. As you can see, they never did. In 1979, they were bought at auction and they were privately owned. I didn't know you could do that. They were privately owned until just a couple years ago, where they were put back up on the market. Until just a few months ago, you could have purchased the Wabash Railroad bridge piers. But someone beat you to it back in February of this year. They bought the piers for $300,000. If you look to the left, you can see Highmark Stadium. This stadium opened in 2013. It's the home of the Pittsburgh Riverhounds, our soccer team. Yeah, we've got more sports here than just the big three. We've got the Riverhounds, we've got the Pittsburgh Passion, which is our ladies football team, and many more. But in general, you kind of get one guess as to what their team colors are, and you probably could guess it. They're all black and yellow. We're about to go underneath our next bridge. This one is called the Fort Pitt Bridge. It's a double-decker bowstring arch bridge that opened in 1959. And it was one of the earliest bridges to be designed with computer-assisted drafting equipment. This bridge has a little bit of a reputation. If you've ever taken it, you might know what I mean. It has a nerve-wracking, nail-biting lane merge, whether you're going in or out of the Fort Pitt Tunnel. You have 300 feet to merge from the far right to the far left. And yes, you usually do have to go from the far right to the far left. And it can be a bit nerve-wracking and it gets backed up very easily. But it's also known as Pittsburgh's front door. If you're coming into the city from the airport, you are more than likely going to go through the Fort Pitt Tunnel. The city is totally obscured by the mountain until you exit that tunnel, where the city explodes into view. And no city quite makes an entrance like Pittsburgh. Now that we're clear of the bridge, I want to bring your attention to the right, to the park. We're going to talk about its namesake. You see that little flagpole there? Now look down. You see that small building with the pointed roof? That is the Fort Pitt Blockhouse. That is all that remains of the original Fort Pitt. It stood right outside the fort and was the first line of defense from any attack. The fort was built between 1759 and 1761. To make a very long story short, in 1758, General John Forbes, British general, came upon this area that we now call the Point with George Washington and 6,000 British soldiers and some Native American allies. They were here to reclaim the area from the French, who kicked the British out quite a few years prior. They already had a fort here named Fort Duquesne. However, there were only 200 regulars guarding Fort Duquesne, and the Frenchmen decided this was not a fight they were willing to test, so they just got out of there. But not before they torched Fort Duquesne on the way out. I guess if they couldn't have it, no one could. So Forbes and Washington looked upon this area that was now theirs. Washington said, well, what do you think we should call this area? We're not going to call it Duquesne, that's way too French. And Forbes thought, I'm paraphrasing, and Forbes said, well, how about we call it Pittsburgh? Yes, the H on the end of Pittsburgh was originally pronounced Borough, because Forbes was a Scotsman. And like Edinburgh in Scotland and many other cities there, the H on the end means it was Pittsburgh originally, and the Pitt is from William Pitt, who was the highly esteemed Prime Minister of Great Britain in 1758, when the area got its name. As you can see, we're coming up on the confluence of the three rivers. That is where the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers come together and they form the Ohio, carving out downtown Pittsburgh's distinctive peninsula shape, which is nicknamed the Golden Triangle. So we're going to leave the Monongahela River, but before we do, well, maybe too late, I think we're already out of the river, but anyway, here's some information about the Monongahela, or as locals call it, the Mon. The Mon is a mud-based river. It's the only one out of the three that is mud-based. The other two are sand and gravel-based. The name Monongahela references that characteristic. It's a Unami word, which is a Native American language, that means steep sliding banks along the water. And it's 128 miles long, and it begins at Fairmont, West Virginia, flowing north the entire way right here to the Point. If you look to the left, you can see the Ohio River. The Ohio River, the name Ohio means fair waters, and it flows 981 miles all the way from here to Cairo, Illinois, where it meets up with the Mississippi. If you look back over to the right, of course, you can see Point State Park and the gem in the Golden Triangle, that beautiful fountain. The fountain is capable of shooting up to 150 feet in the air. But on a windy day, you'll notice that the water level rises and falls depending on the wind speed, because there are wind sensors that are built in. The park itself is 36 acres of dedicated green space. But in the mid-20th century, this was a lot of shuttered factories and a lot of urban decay, as the whole area was heavily industrialized. So the city decided they could do better, and they bought up the property and converted it to the beautiful public green space that we can all enjoy today. We're going to continue our voyage down the Allegheny River now. The name Allegheny means beautiful stream. It is 325 miles long. It starts in Potter County, PA,